At least 7 people were injured in a missile strike, while 2 others were hospitalized, and 23 private homes, 12 apartment buildings and a post office suffered damage.
All right, in other news, Russia has conducted fresh strikes on Ukraine's Zaporizhia region. Ukraine says Russian forces carried out 567 attacks over the last 24 hours.
Biggest Russian drone and missile attack of the war. Ukraine says Moscow fired 550 drones and 11 missiles overnight.
Ukrainian regions, including Zaporizhia, Kharkiv, Kherson and Mykolaiv, have reported injuries from Russian attacks.
What if I told you that the Russians set a deadly trap at a strategic bridge, and Ukraine didn't just avoid it, they turned it into a weapon? That's exactly what happened at dawn near the Nzagol bridge. Russia was betting on Ukrainian forces walking straight into their layered defenses. Instead, Ukraine patiently waited, mapped every mine, jammer, and machine gun nest, and then detonated the bridge from underneath with a single drone. How did they transform Russia's strongest position into its greatest weakness? That's the story you're about to see unfold. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now back to the video. A heavily fortified bridge is both a lure and a shield. On one hand, it promises safe passage for the army that controls it. On the other, it tempts the enemy into a kill zone where every inch is covered by machine guns, mines, and explosives. The Nzagol bridge was designed to be exactly that. For Russia, it held far more value than a simple crossing point. It was their main artery toward Kharkiv, the kind of logistical route commanders dream of defending because it forces attackers into a bottleneck that is easy to predict. They ringed it with sensors, planted rows of TM-62 mines beneath the deck, and stationed machine gun nests on either embankment. To reinforce the deadliness of the trap, electronic jammers hummed on site, throwing static at drone pilots and cutting out communication channels. The message to Ukraine was clear: approach this bridge and you do not come out alive. That confidence was not faked. Russian commanders believed they had engineered a fortress that no unit could storm without catastrophic losses. The trap was elaborate enough that Ukrainian forces would be forced to go around the bridge, losing time and momentum, or try the crossing and pay with entire battalions. They doubled down on this confidence by wiring the TM-62 mines directly to the internal deck supports. Even if Ukrainians managed to push through machine gun fire, the charges could be triggered remotely to send concrete and steel raining down into the river in seconds. Russia pictured the bridge as an untouchable choke point.
On the diplomatic front, US President Donald Trump has issued a 10-day ultimatum to Russian President Vladimir Putin.
All right, in other news, Russia has conducted fresh strikes on Ukraine's Zaporizhia region. Ukraine says Russian forces carried out 567 attacks over the last 24 hours.
To Russia launching a massive aerial assault against Ukraine, the biggest since the invasion more than 3 years ago.
Feeding armor and supply trucks through while daring Ukrainian forces to risk the attempt. What Russia did not anticipate was that Ukraine would focus on the trap itself rather than the bridge as a means of passage. The plan that emerged was patient, methodical, and aimed at turning every hidden defense into a weakness. Instead of sending men into the open, Ukrainian units brought in drones, some skimming so close to the river's surface that Russian radars could barely catch them. With each pass, they collected footage and feeds, picking out concealed positions where gunners had been tucked under camouflage. Tiny ground robots approached the banks, deliberately tripping simple wire traps and exposing where booby devices had been buried to shred infantry lines. To the Russians, the movement seemed like amateur probing. In reality, the Ukrainians were building a map of every trigger point. Once that map was complete, the trap began to unravel. Ukrainian drone operators sent in decoy drones at night, flying low and loud enough to invite Russian PKM gunners to open fire. Each burst of machine gun rounds marked another gap in the sectors of coverage. When one nest fired, it revealed another that stayed quiet, leaving blind spots Ukraine recorded instantly. Every blind angle later became a window of approach for the real strikes. At the same time, Artillery units worked in tandem with pilots armed with KH-31P anti-radar missiles. Together, they dismantled the layered protection behind the bridge. HIMARS launchers targeted ammunition depots feeding the gun crews, while precision strikes cut out radar sites that had guarded the airspace. What looked like incidental strikes was actually the quiet clearing of the supports that made the bridge untouchable. The Russians, frustrated but still confident, relied on one safeguard: their mobile jamming truck parked behind the ridge. This vehicle disrupted drone feeds and had saved countless positions before, but when a kamikaze FPV drone locked onto it and drove straight into the cabin, the protection collapsed.
Rescue workers say one person died and 26 were injured.
At least 7 people were injured in a missile strike, while 2 others were hospitalized, and 23 private homes, 12 apartment buildings, and a post office suffered damage. Ukrainian regions, including Zaporizhia, Kharkiv, Kherson, and Mykolaiv, have reported injuries from Russian attacks.
With its explosion, the electronic curtain blanketing the bridge fell away. Drone operators suddenly had full visibility, uninterrupted and unhindered. Now the bridge was no longer defended by an invisible shield. Ukraine executed what they later called the vampire tactic. Having identified the placement of the TM-62 mines strung inside the bridge's structure, they sent one FPV drone racing low over the water. Instead of attacking a gunner or vehicle, it plunged directly toward the exposed trigger wiring. One impact set off a chain reaction, igniting the row of explosives already embedded into the deck. The detonation was instantaneous, and seconds later the bridge folded onto itself, concrete and supports crashing into the river while fire plumes rolled upward. The trap had been sprung, but not against Ukrainian forces. It had been turned inward, destroying the very supply link Russia needed most. The true question became, what happens when you cut the supply artery of an advancing army? One strike collapsed more than concrete. By destroying the Nzagol bridge, Ukraine forced Russian columns to reroute through weaker, longer supply lines that stretched their convoys thin and exposed them to ambushes.
Biggest Russian drone and missile attack of the war. Ukraine says Moscow fired 550 drones and 11 missiles overnight.
Ukraine and Russia are exchanging fire on multiple fronts. Bridges are being destroyed, cities are burning, and oil depots are under attack, vying to step up attacks in response to increasing Russian offensives. Over the past 24 hours,
what once looked like a fortress turned into a liability in a single morning. The lesson is clear. Sheer numbers no longer guarantee dominance. Modern battles hinge on quick integration of drones, artillery, cyber tools, and timing that denies the enemy initiative. If one bridge can reset the balance in a region, what will the next clash over supply arteries tell us about the future of war?